Hello, and welcome to Get Focused, Millennial Matters, Episode 11, The Undocumented Experience, From the Outside In. I am your host, Salena Santibañez Guipzot. Our organization, Growing Empowered Together, or GET for short, connects the dots between personal experiences and public policy in order to motivate more young people to vote and volunteer in Texas. Today's feature examines two very different types of experiences that undocumented immigrants have in America. We'll discuss the challenges faced by undocumented immigrants who come to America seeking asylum, and then explore the experiences of immigrant children and their families who are already living here, in our communities and attending our schools. Our two guests, Leah Rodriguez and Viridiana Carrizales, are doing important work in Texas to improve the lives of these two groups of undocumented immigrants. We'll start by talking with Leah. Leah is currently enrolled in UT School of Law and has extensive experience in volunteering with refugee and immigration clinics in Austin. She graduated with special honors from the University of Texas in Austin with a BA in Latin American Studies. Welcome, Leah.
Thank you for having me.
What causes people to want to migrate to the U.S. from Central America and Mexico?
Sure. There are a lot of different reasons that people come to the United States. Asylum seekers, of course, are fleeing persecution, fleeing for their lives, whether that's persecution of the government or a private actor. And some people come because of extreme poverty, work opportunities. A lot of people have family ties in the United States, especially when they're coming from Mexico and Central America.
Thank you, Leah. And give us an idea of a typical migration journey, if you will.
Sure. Well, of course, it depends from where you are coming. For example, someone coming from Central America might ride a train through Mexico and then travel across the U.S.-Mexico border with a coyote, a guide who's familiar with the landscape and knows how to avoid dangerous areas. Or someone who's coming from, let's say, West Africa, they might fly into Brazil and then travel through bus and train and however they can through South America, Central America, Mexico, and finally make it here to Texas. Everyone has a different journey.
Thank you. More than half of the 12.5 million illegal immigrants living in the U.S. originally came to the U.S. legally, but then later fell out of status, just like you mentioned. Does it make sense to think that the same immigrant can be good for America until there is a change in the status of his or her immigration paperwork?
Another important question. I worked with a client who has lived in the United States longer than I've been alive. When he came, he didn't have status, and then there was a change in the law. He was able to get status and renew it continually for about 10 years until an attorney made a mistake, just checked the wrong box on one of his renewal forms, and long story short, that thrust him into removal proceedings.
Oh my goodness.
So I don't think that, something like a clerical error that could cause someone to fall out of status changes who they are at all.
So I did the documentation for my husband, and it was very tedious, and all the questions, so I could see how if someone trained as an attorney can make a simple clerical error, the pressures on other individuals. How many family detention centers are there in the United States, and how many of them are located here in the state of Texas as of the summer of 2018?
As of summer of 2018, there are 3 family detention centers. 2 are here in Texas, 1 in Karnes County, and the other in Dilley.
How many detention beds are there in the Texas centers?
In total, at the moment, it's about 3,000 beds.
For all 2 centers here in Texas?
Yes.
How many Texas residents haven't seen or even heard of family detention centers?
I would say a great number. The centers are deliberately put in rural areas, sort of out of sight of the public eye. I think that's intentional. They are farther from legal resources, and a lot of people don't know that it's in our backyard.
Moreover, visitation to the centers has proven very difficult even for elected officials and family members. Why aren't the centers more visible and accessible? And you kind of touched on that.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is that they are run by private corporations and they're for-profit corporations, so they don't really have a lot of oversight. There are a lot of situations where someone asks for information and is just told no, and they might say that's a trade secret, or they just don't really have anyone holding them accountable.
What legal ramifications are there for detention centers that fail to uphold the family detention standards prepared by our government?
Not many. There's no private right of action. If they don't follow a standard, no one's going to be taking them to court. They get away with a lot, in my opinion. There are also some standards that are just never enforced. I mean, in the state of Texas, if you're going to care for children, you should be licensed as a child care facility. So there was litigation around that issue at Carnes, and a judge said, "Yeah, you're right, but the center is still running today. It's not licensed as a child care facility, even though they're taking care of children."
What type of work do you and other students do when you go to detention centers? Paint that picture, Leah. What does that look like inside?
Well, I've had a lot of opportunities to go to the Carnes Center, for example, through the law school. So it's sort of an all-day event. We all drive down in a van together. It's a couple hours south of here, and we get there early in the morning and start to meet with people one-on-one. Sometimes they have their children with them. Sometimes they are, playing just outside our meeting room, depending on the preference of the mother. It's a long day. You hear sometimes you're the first person that they're telling about many years of traumatic experiences, persecution. And at the end of the day, we drive back to the law school, and they, of course, have to stay there, and there's only so much you can do to help prepare them, but really detention is just not the place for anyone to be fighting an asylum case.
You've helped provide pro bono legal services to detained families at the Carnes County Residential Center. What stories have you heard from detainees about the physical or emotional traumas that they have endured during detention? Maybe one in particular that never really left you?
Something during detention?
Mm-hmm.
I've been out to detention centers, over the last couple years, more than a dozen times, and it's always very hard. If one thing sticks out in my mind right now, it's after this most recent election, just hearing from some of the women how they were treated by agents of our government. They were told, "You don't have rights here, you're wasting your time, you're going to be sent back." It's really not their place to make that decision. I think a lot of people felt emboldened by the rhetoric they were all of a sudden hearing on TV and from officials, and sort of took it upon themselves to echo that same rhetoric when it's really not their place to do that.
What do women and families have to do to have a chance to present their asylum cases? How do you, when you get to the detention center, how do you decide who you see and who sees you?
There's a lot of coordinating with other nonprofits. At Carnes in particular, Raíces is the group that coordinates, and they have a list of people, and there's sort of a database. It's a lot of work, and you can't do it all in one day, and so if a group from the law school can go on a Saturday, we have a log of, what did they talk about on Friday, and we can sort of pick it up from there. It's not ideal. I mean, if everyone could have a private attorney to talk to about their case, that would be incredible.
Tell us about some of the volunteer work that you've done in support of detained immigrants.
I mean, going down to the detention centers as often as I can. Once people are out, that's not the end of the road. An asylum case takes a lot of preparation. It's not enough just to say, this is what happened to me. You need to corroborate it, submit a lot of evidence. So just working with people, helping them to tell their own story. If they're in removal proceedings, they'll need to go in front of a judge. Especially for someone who has been abused by their own government, it's hard to trust officials and put yourself in a situation where you can tell a really sensitive story. So just helping people find their own voice.
Overall, has volunteering been a positive experience for you?
Absolutely. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into in law school. My parents aren't attorneys. No one told me what to expect. I knew it was going to be academically challenging, but if it weren't for the pro bono opportunities and sort of remembering why I was there and what I wanted to do, it would have been a lot more difficult.
That real life experience got you through. Thank you, Leah, for sharing your experiences and for your passion for justice with us today. We'll be back in a minute with our second guest.
Thanks for having me.
She is the co-founder and CEO of ImmSchools, a nonprofit that creates safe and welcoming schools for immigrant children and families. Welcome, Viri.
Thank you for having me.
Your parents brought you to America from Michoacan, Mexico when you were 11 years old. Why did your family migrate to the United States?
They were coming and they brought me here in search of better educational opportunities. In my hometown of Michoacan, there was only one elementary school. So people were just expected to go to elementary and then join the fields and do hard labor. My parents had bigger dreams for us, so he brought myself and my sisters to the U.S.
What did your parents leave behind in order to migrate to the U.S.?
They left everything, their language, a place where they felt at home. My grandparents stayed back, and for many years, my parents were not able to go back to Mexico, and they unfortunately missed the funerals of their own parents. That's what they left behind to bring my sisters and I here.
As a child, what picture did your parents paint for you about America?
I had a lot of cousins that lived in the U.S. before we came here, and I remember watching movies and thinking of the U.S. as this place with tons of beautiful houses and cars. I thought my family lived in mansions here, and so I remember the first time that I came and I was looking at all their houses, very different from my small town in Mexico, and then realized that my family were living in this very small apartment, very different from this picture and idea that I had when I was little about what the U.S. was.
Growing up, did you feel like any other American children, or did you feel different from your peers in the neighborhood and in school because of your immigration status? At first when I came here, I struggled with the language barrier, and but very quickly got acquainted to how things worked here. I made friends, felt very similar to other kids who were my age. And it really wasn't until I was a senior in high school when I realized that I was undocumented and truly what being undocumented meant in this country. But prior to that, my childhood was like any other kid in the U.S. While still a high school student, you founded the grassroots organization Cambiando Tu Futuro. What first motivated you to become an immigrant activist?
I was told by my high school counselor that by not having a social security number that I couldn't go to college. And I refused to believe those words when he shared those with me. And I started, reaching out to my mentors, to other people. I just felt like I had worked so hard to get to that point that I was not going to just believe my counselor and stop trying. So I went to my church and I made an announcement after church telling everyone there that if they were undocumented, if they were an immigrant and wanted to go to college, to come talk to me. And then that first Sunday, we had over 30 people that came
Wow.
and spoke to me, and I decided to start my own nonprofit organization back in the day to educate other students like myself who didn't know what their rights were in this country. And that was really the reason why I was able to go to college, because someone else told me about my rights. And I felt that I got lucky that I found that person who educated me. And I just wanted to share that knowledge with many other students.
When your immigration status changed from undocumented, and you got your green card, how did that make you feel?
It was a very emotional moment because, for so long I had become used to me being undocumented, to always getting nervous when the cops will come by and or will stop me when I was driving, ask me for my driver's license. I normalized fear. That when I received my green card and my social security number, it took me a while for me to realize that I didn't have to feel afraid. It probably took me over 2 years before I became more comfortable driving. But yeah, it was nothing it was not an immediate change. It took me a while for me not to feel that fear that I have felt for so long.
And your parents, Viri, what was their feelings like when they saw that from you?
Yeah, they were very excited. I had, by the time that I adjusted my status, I had graduated from college for 3 years, and I hadn't had the opportunity to do the things that I wanted to do. And they realized that by me having that social security number, I could finally accomplish my dreams, and in turn, their dreams.
That they fought and struggled for. In 2016, you became an American citizen. What did it mean for you to even have the opportunity to apply to become a citizen, that so many people don't have that chance or opportunity to?
Yes, that is the one right that I don't take for granted. Every day I wake up realizing that, if someone stops me, I don't have to be afraid of being deported, of being detained, like my sister who is still undocumented. And so I've realized that now by having this right of being a U.S. citizen, being able to vote, I can make my voice count, and I can make the voice of my sister who cannot vote count. And as a new U.S. citizen, I cannot even understand or comprehend how people take this right for granted. I wish I could just shake them up and make them realize that, for many of us who were not born with that right, that we depend on people that can vote to vote, so that we can have opportunities. It was because people voted that I had the opportunity to go to college. There's that state law that allows undocumented students to go to college here in Texas. And it was because of people that went out and voted and made that happen. So it's something that I would never take for granted.
You've interacted with many different families of undocumented immigrants over the years. Is there any one story in particular that really stuck with you about how an unhealthy learning environment hindered the emotional, social, or academic growth of an immigrant student?
Unfortunately, so many stories come to mind, but some of the most common ones that I have encountered has been of students, and this was just actually a student that I'm just now working with. She had just come to this country 3 years ago, so she doesn't have DACA, is undocumented. Within 3 years, she got to be in the top 5% of her graduating class. And when she came to talk to the counselor about her opportunities to go to college, her counselor again said, no, you're undocumented, you can't go to college. And somehow was connected with this student. And when I connected with her, she was very emotional. She was crying, and it reminded me of myself back in the day when I heard the same words from my counselor. And I could tell that she was heartbroken because she had tried so hard in those past 3 years to do her best in school, and that still did not matter. That nine-digit social security number was the one thing for her to be able to achieve her dreams. And I remember talking to her, sharing my story, This just happened in March, and she was already hadn't responded to the universities, because I know here in Texas, if you're in the top 5% of your graduating class, you automatically get into some of the public universities here. And so she hadn't really done any of that stuff because she just believed the idea that she couldn't go to college. And I connected with her, and as of last week, she was doing orientation at Texas A&M, very excited to go to college. And I actually talked to her parents quite a bit because I remember my parents as immigrants not understanding the role that they could play in supporting their children who are going to college. So I've talked to and spoken to her parents a lot to make sure they're ready to support her as she starts this journey in college. But there's been so many instances like that where students don't find out from their teachers or from their counselors that they can go to college. They find out through other people who are not even really part of their life.
What sorts of issues might immigrant students deal with, situations in public schools that might make them feel less safe than their peers with citizenship?
One of the biggest things that come to mind, and I know we've been working in San Antonio with one of the school districts here, because one of the biggest things that might be different for undocumented students in K through 12 is that if a district police detains someone for something that happened in a school, that could really mean, or that can create a pipeline to deportation for a student. So for other students, they can probably, get into a fight or something that, students might do. But for undocumented students, that one thing, the action of a police officer within their school district can lead to their deportation. And that's something that I don't know if a lot of students know, because, when you're young, you make all kinds of decisions. But that is one of the biggest things that we're trying to make sure that students, especially young adults, students or teens, understand that their actions mean differently when you're undocumented and could really jeopardize their future in this country.
And the consequences that could potentially come with
Absolutely.
it. So I think, like the Black Lives Matter movement, parents have to have that conversation with their children. Do parents have to have that conversation with their undocumented child? Or does it take place?
Yeah, they do. So I actually had a conversation with my sister. My sister's still undocumented. She's only 2.5 years older than me. She has 2 kids. One is, my niece is 4, my nephew is 8 months. And last year I had to have a conversation with her about what will happen if immigration will get her or detain her and my brother-in-law. And I asked her to signed the legal papers so that I could take custody of my nephew and my niece. And, that was one of the, I have helped a lot of immigrant parents do this family preparedness plan forms. And being on that side and helping my sister do that is such a difficult thing to do. And I can only imagine as a parent being in that position where you're preparing for the worst and having that conversation with your child to say, if immigration were to come and I don't show up or you don't see me, here's what you have to do. It's just one of those really difficult conversations that people are having and need to have, given just the rise of detentions and deportations that are happening right now.
You've led trainings to over 3,000 teachers and school staffs throughout the country through ImmSchools. What are the main lessons that you want the teachers and staff to take away from the training sessions?
One of the biggest things that we shared with teachers are how to make your curriculum more relevant to students. Like, they should be including topics and books that have, immigration as one of their main themes. Oftentimes, when a teacher's not discussing things that are happening around the community, a student doesn't feel heard, doesn't feel like their personal experience matters. So that's one of the biggest things that we tell teachers. You need to incorporate immigration as part of your curriculum and make sure that you're assigning books that talk about immigration. Another thing is just using the right terminology, making sure that educators are using words like undocumented and immigrant, and not the humanizing words like illegal or alien. Because if you're trying to create a safe classroom space, if as a student I hear my teacher saying illegal, or if I hear another student say the word illegal and the teacher not doing anything about it, I automatically feel unsafe, and I'm not going to talk to my teacher about what is happening.
How important is it for eligible voters who care about undocumented and documented immigrants to go out and vote?
Yes, this is the one thing that people can do to really create a positive change for the lives of immigrant students and families. There's a lot of, undocumented immigrants who wish they had that opportunity to advocate and to voice what their needs are. And, as I said earlier, we all have the responsibility as people who live in the community, and realizing that immigrants contribute so much to who we are as a city and as a community. Voting on issues that impact all of us as community members, it's so important. Again, it's one of those rights and privileges that we cannot take for granted. It's the only way that we can change policy, and we can create the change that we want to see in our communities.
How can people who are not eligible to vote help undocumented immigrant students?
Well, and this goes for those who can vote and those who can vote. We can all volunteer. We can all become civically engaged. You don't need to have a status to become a volunteer. Many of organizations who need translators, who need people to donate things or help, with processing files in an office. You can also go door to door to inform voters or people in the community about the issues that are happening. There's so many ways that we can all be involved. Voting is one thing, but there's many other things that come before that. And I think marching, and there's so many marches, there's many ways that people can become civically involved.
GET encourages young people who are passionate about a cause to go out into their community and volunteer their time to further that cause. Have you engaged in any volunteer work to help undocumented immigrants?
I feel like I was very fortunate to get a lot of people that helped me, and a lot of organizations that were created to help people like me or students like me. And that's something that I feel, since I've had this opportunity to adjust my status to start this nonprofit, it has become my mission to, anytime I can, give my time and, help students.
We'd like to thank Leah and Viri for joining us today. Through their heartfelt immigration volunteerism and advocacy, we are reminded of the last words of Emma Lazarus's poem on the Statue of Liberty, an American promise to immigrants who arrive at our shores. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. You can learn more about the topics discussed on our show and our organization Growing Empowered Together by visiting the website listed on the screen below.